your goal. You have lots of goals. But
Oh no, I'm a big Cleveland
no,
fan.
I know you
And
are.
if I'm not, Don Graves will give me a call in the middle of the night and tell me why.
And then Don Graves. Where's I mean to ignore you. Oh, hi, sure.
Thank you.
Y'all ready? Should we start, Lisa? 125? Okay. I mean, 225, yeah, 120, okay. All right, whatever. So I can talk that long. Okay. All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you especially the advocates who understand that in our country, in so many ways, for human beings, it starts with housing, how important that is. I will be joined by a moment in my comrade in arms, Chair Waters from the House, who has been a housing advocate perhaps longer than any of us up here, certainly longer than I have been, and has been someone I looked to when I was in the House, not in her committee in those days, but have admired her work on all kinds of things, financial service related, especially housing. David Dworkin, Bob Goldberg, Nikitra Bailey, Sarah Rodriguez, Chuck Folke, Chris Benson, and Sarah Sadie, and thank you all for joining us. You will hear from each of them in a minute. We're here today, as the sign suggests, we're here today because housing is infrastructure. It's as important as roads and bridges and buses and broadband and so much else. It's the foundation for opportunity. It's vital infrastructure. It's an issue that matters to everybody around the country. It matters to inner city Cleveland. It matters to Southeast Ohio, Appalachia. It matters to farm country in Western Ohio. In every state it matters. It matters in Indian country. It matters in the South. It matters in the Great Lakes states. It's the biggest cost most families are facing, and the cost is way too high. We know fundamentally what's wrong with our economy. For decades, corporate profits have been up. Productivity is up, to be sure. Corporate profits are up. Executive compensation is through the roof, yet wages have been flat and housing costs have gone up. The cost of living, nothing more than the cost of housing is the cost of living has gone up. We can't build an economy that works for everyone when housing prices eat up more and more families' budgets. And you know the numbers. Prior to the pandemic, 1/4 of renters in this country paid half their income in housing. One thing happened in their lives. They got sick, their car broke down, their child was out of school for a few days. Any number of things could happen, and those families faced eviction. And when families face eviction, their lives are turned upside down. But we can bring down people's rent and mortgage and utility bills. We can give more people the opportunity to own a home and join the middle class. It means building more homes that people can afford. It means improving the housing we already have and making it more affordable, from public housing in New York to Indian country in Montana. It's helping more first-generation home buyers. It's closing at the same time the racial home ownership gap, which is not closed since 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated and the Fair Housing Bill was passed. It's creating jobs, making homes more energy efficient and more resilient to climate disasters. When we see housing problems in rural areas and small cities like Mansfield, Ohio, where I grew up, in big cities across the country, it's a national problem. It needs a national investment and a significant investment. Everyone here understands that. Chair Waters understands that perhaps better than everyone. We have a once in a generation opportunity to connect more families to their jobs, to education, to child care, to opportunity in their neighborhoods. I'll let the chair talk about the House, but I want to underscore the depth among almost every single member of the Democratic member of the Senate, the support for robust, and I mean robust, housing funding. Just last week, Senators Merkley and Padilla and Feinstein led a letter to the president voicing support. None of those three are on the Housing, Banking, and Housing Committee, but so there is support throughout the Senate, support for housing funding. Two-thirds of Senate Democrats voiced their support in that letter, 2/3. With all the other priorities we all have, 2/3 said we need robust funding for housing. It's essential. It's maybe the essential element of anything we do. All of us are here to deliver one message. We must invest in housing because housing is infrastructure. I'll turn it over to David Dworkin first. David from Cleveland, Ohio. David.
Thank you very much. I'm an honorary member of Cleveland, Ohio, but don't tell anybody in Detroit that. Thank you, Chairman Brown, very much, and thank you for your thoughtful and tenacious leadership. Behind me today are representatives of every facet of the housing industry, housing and civil rights advocacy across the political spectrum. And our message is very simple and clear. Housing is infrastructure. In one of the most physical manifestations of our well-being, housing impacts individuals, it impacts families, it impacts our communities. And Congress is prepared to pass historic legislation to modernize our traditional and technological infrastructure. But who is going to build and repair this infrastructure? And where are they going to live? Substantial investments in housing supply are essential to ensuring that Americans can afford to live where they work. Without it, housing prices will continue to rise, workers will be harder to find, and those who get jobs will commute more hours in their cars and their trucks. Housing is an essential component of any effort to address families, racial equity, our health, and our environment. We must include a substantial investment in housing priorities in the budget reconciliation. On this, we all agree. We will now hear from Bob Goldberg, CEO of the National Association of Realtors. Bob?
Thank you, David, and thank you, Chairman Brown. You know, all of you are joining us because clearly we know this is a very important cause. Look at the folks that are here representing the respective areas of housing. The real estate industry accounted for $3.83 trillion, or 18.3% of gross domestic product in this country in 2020. And each time a house is bought or sold, it injects roughly about $94,000 in the community's economy. But making sure everyone has a place to call home isn't just the foundation of our economy. It's the fabric of our communities, our families, and each of our lives. Lawmakers here in Washington have an opportunity to make a difference right now, and we're calling on them to do so. Their actions today can increase every American's access to safe, affordable housing for years and years to come. Just recently, the National Association of Realtors created a report and found that we are facing a housing shortage of about 6 million units. It's that substantial. As a nation, we have to find a way, we must find a way to close that shortfall. Doing so will be particularly meaningful for lower income households, for millennials, and households of color. NAR, alongside our 1.5 million Realtor members, serve consumers in every U.S. zip code in this country. And their goal is to ensure a fair and equitable housing market. We look forward to supporting these critical conversations however way we can in the coming days and weeks ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bob. Now we'll hear from Nikitra Bailey with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Ms. Bailey, sorry to do this to you, but I think the chairwoman is here, and I wouldn't put anybody else in front of you except for her. I think she is walking up, or is she? I guess she's not. Why don't you go ahead? Sorry, Ms. Bailey.
That's all right. Thank you.
For the rudeness. My mother taught me better than that.
I know you to be very kind, sir. Thank you, David, and thank you, Chairman Brown and Chairwoman Waters. The National Fair Housing Alliance is proud to be here today, alongside you, the National Housing Conference, and our fellow advocates. NAFA joins in on calling Congress to make significant investments in housing programs in the Build Back Better Act. Buying a home is a milestone for families, but one that many can't reach due to decades of discriminatory federal housing policies that set back black, brown, and poor white communities on the journey toward wealth creation and homeownership. Americans support improved access to affordable housing. A recent bipartisan Policy Center Morning Consult poll found that 87% of adults across the political spectrum agree that every child and family should have access to a safe, decent, and affordable home. Furthermore, 79% of adults agree that owning a home is an essential part of the American dream. If Congress takes steps to meaningfully invest in housing programs, we can begin to reverse decades of injustices, strengthen local economies, and take steps to really reverse discrimination. It is impossible to achieve racial justice without housing justice. So NAFA joins in urging robust funding for housing programs in the Build Back Better Act. We stand ready to continue to work with Congress and to ensure we can begin to achieve housing justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on a second. My pleasure to introduce Maxine Waters. She has been a mentor to many, an activist all her life, perhaps the most important housing advocate in the country. She is a big part of the reason that we're going to do this huge investment in housing that will change lives from her district in, I believe, South Central to my state of Ohio. We're going to see real change because of her leadership. So my pleasure to introduce my longtime friend, Maxine Waters, chair of the House Financial Services and _ Housing Committee. Maxine, welcome. Come on up.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here with my good friend, my colleague, Sherrod Brown. We work so closely together on housing issues that's impacting so many people in this country. I want you to know that we're on pins and needles as we await some of the decisions that are being made at the White House. We are very much aware that the $3.5 trillion that appeared to be the number that we were negotiating has turned out to be something less. I can't even tell you at this point what the top line is. I do know this, that the negotiations are going on about budget cuts. This housing bill that Sherrod and I have worked on, $327 billion, is the housing bill that would deal with the housing crisis in this country. Much of the housing needs in this country have been ignored for far too long. And so this bill includes not only money to deal with the problems of public housing and the need for repair and renovation. Some of these public housing units, the elevators do not work, they do not have heat in the wintertime, and it goes on and on and on. It's long past time to have some resources directed toward correcting all of these ills with the public housing projects. In addition to that, the Section 8 vouchers are very important. There are many people who work every day, but they cannot afford the high costs of rental, and they are simply seeking some help from their government. Section 8 vouchers are very, very important. And Sherrod, I want you to know there are rumors about what is going on in relationship to Section 8 vouchers, that they may be zeroed out. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let Section 8 vouchers be zeroed out. Not only do they assist those who need subsidy from their government, we also have project-based Section 8 vouchers to build new units. That's very important. In addition to that, the Housing Trust Fund. Barney Frank and I and Sherrod, we worked on creating this Housing Trust Fund that really never got funded. And so now we have directed some $36 billion to build affordable units. And that's extraordinarily important. We really don't want to see it cut. But in addition to that, we also have money that's going to the cities for CDBG and for the home program. And we've also directed assistance to those who are seeking to be homeowners, many who work every day and can afford a mortgage, but they cannot afford a down payment. So we have $10 billion in the bill to assist first generation. And for me, that helps to deal with millennials who have all of these gig jobs, working 2 and 3 jobs. They can pay a mortgage, but they can't save up the money for the down payment. So that's basically what we're trying to do with this housing bill. I mentioned that it is a crisis, and many of you know that you're stepping over the homeless. I don't care where you come from, whether you're in the urban area, whether you're in rural areas. And many people say, oh, what a shame. And some people go by and they give them sandwiches, or they give them a shirt, or they give them a blanket. That's false security. That is not helping with what we need to do dealing with the homeless of this country. We need to have not only transitional opportunities for them, maybe getting out of the tents into hotel rooms until they can get into more permanent housing with support. We need support for those who have been languishing on our sidewalks for so many years now. And so we're going to be fighting very hard. When Sherrod and I take a good look and we see what is being proposed, we're not simply going to go along to get along. We're probably going to have to give an alternative to whatever is being suggested. And I certainly hope that there is no attempt by which to do deep cuts in housing. Our people in this country need their government to come to their assistance to deal with serious housing crisis in the country. So Sherrod, I want to thank you so much for all the work that you do. I know even on your side it's tougher than on my side. I wonder why.
Tough both ways. Thanks, Maxine.
Okay, but thank you for
Thanks,
being
everybody.
right there. Thank
Sarah
you.
Rodriguez is next, I think.
All right, thank you so very
Thanks,
much for
Maxine.
being here, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
So it's now my pleasure to introduce Sarah Rodriguez from the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. Sarah, nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having us. Over the past 2 years, we have learned that a failure to invest in the future can leave our country scrambling. As we stand at a legislative crossroad, I urge you to consider that few market segments add more to our economy and to the prosperity and stability of America's families than housing, homeownership particularly. Data shows that homeownership can lead to higher civic participation rates, better health outcomes, and higher educational attainment for our children. Homeownership is the single most powerful strategy for closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap. That is why we're here today. Latinos are the youngest demographic in the nation with the highest workforce participation rate. Latino homeowners have 28 times the wealth than Latino renters. And while the wealth gap between Latino families and their non-Hispanic white counterparts is still unacceptably wide, the gap narrows considerably when comparing the household wealth of Latino homeowners to that of non-Hispanic white homeowners. Here is the critical point. As the Latino population ages into primary home buying years, experts project that 70% of all homeownership growth in America will come from Latino families. The demand for housing among communities of color is there. However, the historic low levels of housing supply have left first-time homebuyers engaged in bidding wars that widen these inequalities even more. Greater investment in housing is needed now more than ever to unleash the homeownership growth potential inherent in our demographic vibrancy. A failure to invest in housing today could result in the lowest overall homeownership rate of our generation and stunt our economic growth. The National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, NAREP, urges Congress to ensure that housing and homeownership specifically remain as critical elements of the upcoming budget reconciliation bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And now we're going to hear from Chuck Foskey, the chairman of the National Association of Home Builders. Thank you.
I'm Chuck Falk, the chairman of the board of the National Association of Home Builders. And on behalf of the National Association of Home Builders and those we represent, I thank you for your commitment to further the mission that we work for every day, to build homes, enrich communities, and change lives. As home builders, we provide American families a place to grow, thrive, create, and dream. However, due to many supply side issues and high regulatory costs, builders have been unable to keep up with demand since the Great Recession. It's unconscionable to think that leaders in Congress would contemplate jettisoning an opportunity for historic investment in housing for the sake of other social programs. Housing is not a luxury. Safe, affordable housing, desirable housing is a need, a necessity for hardworking American families. When families have a safe place to call home, they can achieve what perhaps in previous generations they could not. Housing can be the great equalizer of economic and social disparities in America. We must work to ensure that homeownership is a universally attainable option in this country, because it can open the door to middle class and other opportunities available beyond. And for those not ready, that are ready yet for homeownership, we need to ensure access to safe, decent, and affordable rental housing. We must not only fund housing in the Build Back Better plan, we must go one step further and look comprehensively at our nation's housing policy and create a 21st century housing plan. I am hopeful that all that we represent today will come together and further the American dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Falk. We're now going to hear from Chris Vincent with Habitat for Humanity, our other builder here.
Thanks, David. If you haven't ever been to a Habitat for Humanity home dedication, I would highly recommend you do it. It is an example of exactly what was just said, which is housing is not a luxury. It's an essential element and a foundation to life for many families, and the country needs an investment. So housing must remain in this critical human infrastructure package. Congress needs to address the full housing spectrum, from supportive housing to rental to affordable home ownership. Yesterday, we delivered a letter to congressional leaders signed by more than 375 Habitat organizations from all 50 states and DC, representing rural, suburban, and urban communities, calling for robust housing investments. Our network knows the supply of affordable homes in this country is at an historic low. So one of our priorities must be to ensure that there is a ready supply of safe, decent, and affordable homes to purchase. Housing is foundational to many social concerns, including health, education, and certainly wealth building. Habitat knows that one of the best ways to collapse the racial wealth gap is through opening access to affordable homeownership. And this bill is our chance to take action to create communities that are inviting and thriving for all. So we are encouraged to work with Congress in the coming days and weeks and encourage everybody to push for increased housing investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And finally, we're going to hear from Sarah Sadian with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Thanks, Sarah.
The targeted investments in housing in the Build Back Better Act provide a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to end homelessness in America and put our nation on a path towards housing stability and equity for all. We are hearing that the president and congressional leaders are talking about cutting or gutting housing investments, and let me be clear, taking resources away that could be housing people with the greatest needs is unacceptable. We're in the midst of an affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Nationally, there's a shortage of 7 million homes affordable and available to people with the lowest incomes. There is no state and there is no congressional district with enough affordable homes to meet this demand. To keep a roof over their heads, 8 million of the lowest income households spend at least half of their incomes on rent, leaving few resources to put food on the table, cover medical costs, or meet other basic needs. And those who are most harmed are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The housing investments in the Build Back Better Act directly address the underlying causes of this crisis. By expanding rental assistance, the bill can bridge the gap between wages and housing costs for 1 million additional households so that they can afford to keep a roof over their head. By preserving public housing and building new homes for those with the greatest needs through the National Housing Trust Fund, the bill addresses the severe shortage of housing affordable to people with the lowest incomes. Any cuts to the Build Back Better Act must not come at the expense of housing our country's lowest income and most marginalized people. We need to make sure that all housing investments in this bill are deeply targeted towards those with the greatest needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. Really appreciate everyone coming out, especially the chairman of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Development Committee, as well as the chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee. And I just want to say this is the entire continuum of housing in America. Every aspect of housing is represented here. We are like a multi-lane highway. Some of us are in different lanes, but we are all driving in the same direction, and that's because housing is infrastructure and we have to get this funding. Thank you.